Good morning, Stefan. Again, it would have been nice if this was our second podcast, which technically I guess it is, but just for the sake of whoever watches this video, those first couple of seconds were what we tried last week, and we had technical difficulties with no sound. So Stefan and I are going to try again. It looks like everything is working this time around. So welcome, Stefan. Thank you for being willing to come in again, redoing it. Obviously, the perspectives and everything is going to be different this time around, but we'll do our best to talk about AI in education. But do you want to maybe just introduce yourself first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Gary. Second time around's always better. We enjoyed it so much the first time. We had to chat again. Yeah, thanks very much for having me on. Super excited about the conversation. I lead up enablement for a global company, and more recently in the last few months, I'd say, really getting involved in the training and enablement side for AI specifically. I come from a background of education, so both my parents were teachers, and I've been around it my whole life and spent many years in the higher education space in South Africa. So education is very close to my heart, and more recently gotten into the corporate side of education and training and the broader scope of enablement. And what I really have been focused on the last little while is thinking about AR strategies and enablement, and really allowing people or empowering them to use AR to not only do their jobs better, but to empower themselves. It's obviously a topic that's at the tip of everyone's tongue. And the more that I get into it, the more I realize the differing levels of people in the AR journey, from very, very new to very, very experienced. And I think that is going to be the same whether we talk about AI in education from a grade one perspective all the way through to the corporate setting. I don't think that changes. So the theories and the background, I think, stay the same. It's a super interesting place to be at the moment in the world and in AI and in education. And there's so much to talk about and so much to think about. But thanks very much for having me on, and looking forward to where we go.
Yeah, it's only a pleasure. And I think, going on the last conversation we had, this is going to be another one of those very nice ones, going to turn out great. So just coming from the perspective this time around, I remember you said that your company is global, the company that you work for, and you are in payroll, if I remember correctly.
Training, looking after the training and enablement for our payroll team mostly, but that is subsequently um, evolved into AR in general. But my role for the most part is looking after all of our training and enablement for our global payroll team. Yeah, that's where I sit as now, as well as all of the AR enablement aspect of it.
Well, that's good, because I was leading up to a question of, because you are working for a big global company, it's lots of thousands of people worldwide. Your company obviously is well represented in the corporate sector. What are your experiences, apart from the usage of the individual person? I'm more geared towards the impact, the disruption of AI in the workforce, because, and I'll give you a quick example where I'm heading towards, and this is nothing to do with education. We'll get to that later, but just to get a perspective of what AI does at the moment in the world. Let's say we've got 10 people working for a company, and AI can do the work of 10 people, which means they can technically get rid of all 10 people and just replace it with one AI, which is not a good idea. So what I've picked up companies do is they'll retain one person to just oversee whatever the AI does, and the AI does the work of those 10 people. But there's another side to the coin where they say, if AI can do the work of 10 people with the original 10 people, I can now effectively do the work, or get the work done of 100 people because of AI. So you train your existing staff to be more efficient, by giving them tools that reduces the time they normally take on whatever task they will take a lot of time. What is your experience in the workforce there? Is AI disrupting employment, or is it making employment more efficient because of just taking the donkey work away?
There's a couple of ideas to unpack there. So the idea that using AI to replace 10 people because now one person can do the work of 10 people, I think is generally a sense that I get from LinkedIn and just the general kind of feel around AI. That's where a lot of companies have gone. So if you just look around in the tech world, especially in the US, there's been a lot of layoffs regarding AI because now AI can do the work of 10 people as opposed to one person. But certainly at where our company is, and I think we're quite forward looking in this regard, it's about saying the flip side to that coin, as you mentioned, okay, how do we empower 10 people to now do the work of 100? So how do we take those 10 people and how do we then grow our business to be even more impactful with those same 10 people, as opposed to saying, let's get rid of 9 people and keep one and they can now do the work of 10. Let's use 10 to do the work of 100 or the work of 1,000. And then let's grow our business and allow our business to grow in that way, as opposed to jettisoning some people, which I think a lot of companies have done. So I think that's probably the right way to think about AI in the corporate setting. It's about how do we use AI to grow and empower our business as opposed to let's cut headcount. And I think there's a big chasm there between how companies are thinking about it. And certainly where I work, it's just about empowering people to do more work, to do more impactful work, to allow us to grow the business without necessarily needing to grow headcount. And I think that's probably the right way to think about AI. How do we use what we have currently to grow? And the impact is definitely disruptful for sure. There's a couple of things that we've been talking about and I've been talking about and thinking about. The one is that there is a very, very big gap between the, say, literacy level, for lack of a better term, in AI within any organization. But again, we could use this same analogy for schools or for education. There's people who are brand new to using it and there's people who are experts in using it. And that gap is growing every day. The more that people don't use it and the more that there's resistance to using it, the more that the people who are using it effectively grow and that gap starts to widen and widen. So that's one problem that I think a lot of companies and schools and higher education specifically is going to face in the near future. It's about how do we, number one, empower people to use AI, but two, how do we bridge the gap between the differing levels? How do we teach? How do we make sure that everybody is empowered in the same way? How do we create access to AI that levels the playing field? How do we create that democratization of AI when all of that exists? And these are problems that we have, but in a day-to-day setting, it's very, very impactful and stuff changes so quickly. And I think that's part of the reason why there's a lot of, I say, resistance using AI. I saw an interesting stat the other day. There's only like 2 to 5 million people in the world who are using AI to code. And out of a global population of 7 billion, that number is absolutely insane. So there's 80% of the world's population that's never even used AI yet. So we're super early in this journey. And I can definitely understand where people are apprehensive about it, because we went from a world of ChatGPT and Gemini into now Claude. That's the next big thing. But even as I train and I enable people, things like skills and connectors and projects are completely new to a lot of people. Whereas previously it was just using ChatGPT or Gemini as a chat interface and you get something back. But now you're adding in all these different things, and it can be very intimidating to get over that. How do I even start? Well, how do I use all of this? I'm scared to use it because there's 10 other people that are using it in a way that makes me feel inferior, and how do I get to their level? I'm never going to get there. All of these conversations are super interesting, and it's problems that we need to solve. And I think that the disruption is only going to increase, and the snowball's only going to get bigger as it goes down this hill. So it's an interesting intersection of where AI is at the moment and the adoption of AI and people using it. And I'll use your business as an example. I know I saw on LinkedIn you were talking about AI agents the other day and helping companies to agentize some of the different things that they do. Even that is so far removed from the average person who's using AI. Agentic workflows, it's like landing a rocket on the moon for some people. It's so far away from their current locus of control. And it's interesting to see this, where everybody's at with AI. So a long answer to your question, but it's certainly disruptive, and it's been very interesting to see how we bridge the gap and really start to move the needle with AI within all of the different levels of comfort that you have within a school or an organization or university or whatever the case may be.
But I do think the conversation needs to be steered in the direction of the agentic approach. While you were talking, I was thinking, I've been exposed to some people, worldwide, because my guests on this podcast come from all over the world, and I've seen some very innovative agentic solutions. Let's talk about teachers, but I mean, as you rightly said, we are branching out as a company, into creating OpenClaw agents for small businesses as well. And the idea behind it is, and we actually have our very first client came to us and said, you know what, I've got this business, this is what I do, I need AI. And originally the intention or the request was, I need a prompt engineer. And I said, but why do you need a prompt engineer? And he said, no, because I need AI to do work for me. And I said, okay, now wait. What you need is an agent. Because at that stage, I already had the over-the-shoulder tutor as an agent, so I had a perspective of what you cannot do with the large language model. So we started investigating, and the timing was just perfect, to fall in with the release of OpenClaw when this request came in. So it's a great opportunity to actually learn exactly what OpenClaw is, what it can do, all the dangers that are associated with it. How do you design the security, around OpenClaw? But just this idea of an agent fixes a lot of problems. And let's talk education, teachers specifically. One example I saw was a company based in Canada, one of my previous guests. They actually have a UI, a user interface on a website where the teachers can just say, you know what, I need, like they would normally do with your large language models. They would just say, I need an assessment, a lesson plan, a this. And they've got different blocks on the website where they can obviously do rubrics and assessments and lesson plans and gamification ideas, etc. But ultimately, it's the same as doing this in a large language model, except that they take away the need to know what to prompt, if that makes any sense. They make it easier because I need an assessment, so I just click on the block and then I say, it must count out of this, it must have these types of questions, level of difficulties, etc. So the teacher builds in the pedagogy right from the start when they prompt. They don't have to, when they request, let's rather say when they request, they don't have to do the prompt. When we look at something like OpenClaw, we have actually built in an MCP. I don't know if you're familiar with MCP. We've actually built in MCP into the workflow so that the large language model reasoning can be optimally used. I'm sure this other company probably have MCP built into their prompting as well. Don't really know. It was an evasive answer when I asked for obvious reasons. But what I'm thinking is that people who are scared of AI and the disruption of AI should possibly start thinking about maybe the agentic approach is something that will take away the teeth of the monster. Because whoever designs the agent can make it so user-friendly that it really is just part of your normal day-to-day work, but suddenly you have the power of AI behind you. The problem with the agentic approach is it's never free. It has to, I mean, somebody has to make money out of the effort that went into building that agent, maintaining that agent, training that agent. And I think, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I think that's where a lot of resistance comes in, because ChatGPT and Claude and Grok and all these others, they are free. Now somebody comes and says, you know what, I've got something that piggybacks on this, but it's not free anymore. And now suddenly it's not, no, no, no. How much of a resistance is that in the adoption of AI in the world, do you think?
I think that the resistance largely stems from not understanding what AI does. So when you talk about an agentic workflow on a website where someone clicks, I need an assessment, or I need a rubric, I would say at the moment, probably 7 out of 10 people don't even know that's an agentic workflow. They don't even know what that means. So to take a step back and go, okay, if someone is not even able to, at the moment, create a skill using Claude or use a connector in a way that's very clever, then the next, so in my mind, how the AI education journey would go for someone who understands very little about it. It would go from something like a chat to something like a agentic light workflow. So if you use Claude as an example, I'm connected to Gmail and my calendar, and I'll ask it to every day manage my calendar for me. And if I've got some time, it schedules lunch when I have time in my day. That's a agentic light workflow that someone could do using Claude. And then the next step to that is, how do I create a skill based off a conversation that I've had to be useful somewhere else, which is also in its own sense a little bit agentic because it's learning from itself and I'm using it somewhere else. Then the next step in that is, how do I use what I know to create my own agent to become valuable? And I think that's where the hill is. So there's, within that conversation, there's a lot of different points of friction. The first one is, how is someone thinking about AI in general and using it? Like deer in the headlights, I don't know what's going on here as a first step, and then moving to the next step. And I fully agree with you. The agentic way of doing things is where everything is going. But the problem that we probably will face in the future is that we don't want a world where creating agentic workflows is very niche and only certain people do it. You want to empower people to create their own agents. And that's the real power of AI. And I think at the moment, because you have this huge dichotomy between being able to use AI and using it effectively in something like an agentic workflow, at the moment, it's only companies like yourself that can do that, because someone is so far away from understanding what an agentic workflow looks like, and security and MCP and APIs. There's a world there that's very, very far away from the common reality for a lot of people. And I've changed my viewpoints of this. Like, these things change so quickly over the last 2-3 weeks about this, and really taking a step back and in my own journey learning about how to create agents and agentic workflows and working with OpenClaw. And we've got a bunch of amazing things that we've built at our own company to do this internally. But that's where I am in my journey. But also there's a large subset of my stakeholders, and globally, if you just look at the stats, 82% of people haven't even used AI. Getting to the points of agentic workflows is quite a long way away. So I do think that that's where everybody should be focusing, is two different places. The one is, how do we build agentic workflows that are helpful for people, while at the same time upskilling everybody to create their own agentic workflows. And like I say, I don't think a lot of people even understand what that means. When I click on I go to a website and I'm looking for a product, and my chatbot takes me to a video that's perhaps tailored to me based on what I've looked at. That's an agentic workflow, right? It's an agent understanding my needs, and maybe it's building something or going to a repository and giving me the information that I need. That's an agentic workflow. And that understanding, I think, is not very prevalent. And I say not very prevalent from a place of anecdotal thoughts and anecdotal evidence. So I think that's the two things that we're going to need to think about very, very carefully, both generally and certainly in education. How are we creating agents for education, but also how are we upskilling, whether it's learners or educators, to be able to do that themselves and to solve real problems within their own environments, because that's ultimately where the unlock then begins with AI, is when I can take a problem that I have and I can use AI to solve it for me. I can use AI to at least improve it for me, or to use it in some way that my problem is not as big as it used to be. It takes out a manual task, or whatever it is. So those two things I think need to run in parallel. Again, with the flip side of that coin is, the more people who are using agents and building them, the further their level of expertise and knowledge gets from someone who at the moment doesn't know how to do that. So there's a bunch of different things happening at the moment that are super interesting. But I think as a first point, those two things need to run in parallel. It's creating agents that are useful, and how do we upskill whoever we need to upskill to get to that point where they're creating these things themselves.
Okay, but when you say you're using Claude, are you using Claude Work currently to
Everything. So
create?
code, co-work,
Yeah,
anything that Claude
I'm
has. Yeah.
thinking towards what you said about people need to actually be enabled to create their own agents. From my perspective in my company, we have discovered with OpenClaw specifically that it's brilliant and it's powerful, but it's so dangerous. You know, if you give it access to your Gmail account, you can expect something to go wrong somewhere along the line, because it is just still too young. You know, it hasn't been developed robustly enough to be trusted with your computer, with your hard drive, for argument's sake. That's why they say don't install OpenClaw on your local machine, because you've got passwords, you've got banking on your local machine. You don't want to give an AI agent access to accidentally stumble across your passwords, you know, for banking, emails. I've heard so many stories of people, you probably heard about it as well. There's one guy that was working on an open source project, and you know, he submitted code that was generated with AI, with his agent, to the open source project, and one of the project managers at this company, this open source company, rejected it because it says it's AI generated, it wasn't human generated, and they specifically said, to contribute to our open source project, you as a human must submit your ideas, not AI. So they rejected it. And the AI agent, in its heartbeat, the next morning woke up and said, oh, this problem hasn't been solved yet, so let me now try and find an alternative way to solve it. And what it did, it actually started naming and shaming this other guy on the internet, on Twitter, you know, because his name was known. So he started sending out posts on Twitter in the name of its owner, its human, naming and shaming this guy because he didn't approve of the project, you know. And now we can say, yeah, but you know, this is malicious and it's sentient, you know, and it's got a soul. And no, it's still just a computer that was looking at a problem that hasn't been solved, and it was trained as an agent to keep on trying, finding ways of making sure that this project is ticked. And one of those ways that it found was naming and shaming. I was looking at this and I thought, okay, this poor guy who owns the agent obviously, you know, has got a lot of explaining to do. Other people woke up with thousands of dollars worth of expenses that their agents just suddenly ranked up, you know, checking everything, and every time it does something, it uses tokens, and they forgot to put a cap, you know, on the usage of the tokens. So there's a lot of danger in AI, creating AI agents, and I think a lot of people need to just be made aware of it. It is easy, but it is also not that easy to create an agent. So I'm coming back to my point of somebody who has created an agent, and somebody who says, you know what, I need that, but I'm not going to be able to make it myself. It's just a little bit beyond my comprehension level in terms of what needs to happen in the background. So I would rather pay a subscription to use it. That mindset, I think, is what I'm heading towards. People tend to kick against the fact that you need to pay for something that is technically free. If you use ChatGPT, it's free. When you use API calls, it's not free anymore. My agent, my over-the-shoulder tutor, and my OpenClaw both cost me dollars because I need to constantly buy AI credits for the API calls that are being used. I cannot just keep on giving that away for free. It's just not sustainable business. But what I'm actually getting to is what do we tell the kids who are in school currently? I mean, you coming from a corporate background, if you said payroll, what would be a typical qualification that somebody gets at university to be able to apply to a company for payroll administration? Is it BCom, BA? What is the typical graduation qualification, or is a grade not a requirement for payroll? I'm really not sure. I'm asking you.
I mean, there's the short answer is probably yes. So a kind of finance degree and accounting degree. A lot of people, you can't study payroll at university, right? I can't go to Stellenbosch or Tux or UJ and study a degree in payroll. So generally, people find themselves in the world of payroll through work experience, or they're an accountant or a finance administrator and find themselves in that world. But it certainly is helpful to have that. So I'd say, for the sake of the conversation, a degree in finance or accounting would,
Like a BCom.
you would get your foot in the door. And I think and forgive me if I'm incorrect here, where you were going with that is, what do you tell someone now who can learn everything via AI? What do you need to go study to get this degree in the world of payroll, right? So what are we telling students or kids about AI and the need to go and study and the need to have education? Am I right in saying, is that where the conversation was going?
Almost. What I'm actually getting at is a child that is currently, let's say, in grade 7, 12, 13 years old, who is thinking of a BCom degree after school because that is what worked for his parents, that's worked for his parents. In school, you decide what you're going to do after grade 12 and you start planning your future. Right now, the world changes so fast that somebody who's in grade 7 cannot really have the luxury of planning something 6, 7 years from now, because we don't know what the world is going to look like. So it makes it very difficult. And I'm just coming in from the perspective of entrepreneurship as a, let's call it a blanket approach for the kids to say, you know what, maybe you should just wait it out, see where the world is going. You are most probably going to find yourself behind the times if you go and study for 3 years in a BCom direction, because by the time you finish, agents will be doing the payroll, or the accounting and the tax and whatever. So you might find that it's very difficult to get a job with a degree 6, 7 years from now, if that is your plan. So rather think in terms of an entrepreneurship mindset where you literally check it out as it happens. And that's where I'm tapping into your idea of the creating of the agent. Maybe we should tell the kids, you should start looking into what does it take to create an agent, whatever agent it is. I mean, whether it's a health app, or whether it's a payroll administrator, or whether it's just something that counts the socks in your drawer for you every day, or something that just checks the newspaper headlines for you. Just start looking into what it takes to create an agent. And that's why I asked about Claude Work, because I haven't used Claude Work myself, but I believe it is as easy as that with Claude to set up an agent that can do these heartbeat type of things for you. Am I correct?
Yeah, super powerful, and it works very agentically, although I wouldn't say it's strictly an agentic workflow. I think this goes back to something that you mentioned earlier, and when we're talking about companies, jettisoning people so one person can do the work of 10. I don't think the conversation needs to shift from AI can do these things for people, and what's going to happen is people who use AI or students who use AI, the next layer becomes the custodian layer of the output. So it's not about, I think it's about thinking around, don't think of your career as the task anymore. So don't think about it as being an accountant or being a what's another good example? A marketer is another great example, right? You're probably going to need to be able to be the person who understands how to use AI and to use the output in a way that makes sense. And that's where I think the shift is going to come. So when you talk about entrepreneurship, absolutely part of that conversation is only going to be, or the learning is only going to happen by the doing, where someone is creating an agent or using AI to solve a problem like counting the socks in their drawer, like you were saying as an example, by taking a photo, right? By the time they get to their passion, their marketing passion or their finance passion, it's going to shift from having to do the work yourself to understanding what this output means and to use it in a way that's valuable. So that's the skill shift at the moment that I think is going to happen. And like I said, I think a lot of I'm talking now in the corporate sense, a lot of companies almost jump the gun where it's like AI can just do these things and we don't need people. You still need people as the custodian of the output layer and understanding what the output means and to push back on it. If we use payroll as an example, it doesn't mean that payroll professionals are going to go away. What's going to mean is it's a lot quicker for you to get the output that you need to make sense of it, if it's correct or not, and how to use it in the right way. So has the right tax been applied for this specific level of pay? So you are still the ultimate QA layer, I would say, and that's where it's going to move to. And then how do you, extra time that you had, what are you using that towards to use this information in a better way? So I definitely think the entrepreneurship route is one that's going to become far more prevalent, and I think it makes sense for everybody to do that. But I still don't think that careers are going to go away, and I don't think that AI is going to replace everything. It's going to change and it's going to adapt. I know in our conversation last week we were talking about the internet and the huge change that it made, and if we go back many hundreds of years in the printing press, thinking that it's going to take everybody's jobs, and there's more jobs available today in the world that has created new jobs with AI than there was 18 months ago. I don't know exactly what the stats are, but it was something along those lines where there's been more jobs created now with AI that are new roles and roles that have diversified, and there's different ways of doing things than there was 18 months ago. So for instance, the company that I work for, we're in the HR tech space, and it was AI operators, agentic operators. The amount of people that were searching for those terms to hire them has gone up by 270% in the last year. So that's where things are going, and that's where people need to think about. It's not that my job is going to suddenly go away. It's going to be, how do I use the AI that is inevitably going to get used for my role to make sure that I understand what output it's giving me. I understand how to push back. I understand having a very deep conversation with AI, pushing back, this isn't right, this is right, you're wrong, tell me why you're wrong. All those kind of things are important things to think about, and that's where it's moving to. Is we ultimately will become the custodian of this AI output, and that's where the human factor will become very, very valuable. Again, last week I know we were speaking about things like, I personally think that the human-centered arts are going to become a lot more valuable than they are today. Things like music, things like art, painting, things like writing. People who are able to have those skills are going to become very valuable, because right now AI people are using it for that, but it's going to become saturated at some point where people are not going to want computer-driven content, in my view, or AI-driven content, or music, or art, or writing, and that skill is going to become super valuable. So that's also another part of this whole conversation, is if you feel like now you can't go study music at a university, this is a great example, because AI is now just creating music. I think that's the wrong way to think about it. How are you using AI to learn quicker, or how are you using AI to improve, as opposed to not doing the thing that you wanted to do? So in all of this, I think the same thread is true. It's not about AI replacing or AI doing it better. It's how do you use it to supplement whatever it is that you think you're going to do, and how are you still ultimately the person who the QA of this? Like, it still needs to be valuable. How do you turn the output that it gives into value?
Um, I do think you have touched on a key phrase there that I'm going to use in the title or the description of this video when I do publish it later, which is humans need to become the custodians of the AI output. I don't know if you realize exactly how powerful that statement is that you've just created on the fly, I think, or did you think of this before? Because this is so powerful in its simplicity to summarize the exact problem that I'm describing in terms of what do we tell the kids. Just realizing that that is where your responsibility for your future is. The future proofing, whether you become an entrepreneur in the traditional sense of the word, where you like the risk appetite, or whether you become an entrepreneur in inverted commas because you are thinking out of the box to actually get a job one day. You still, both of those still need to be aware that, yes, as you rightly said, AI will most probably do the job that you think you are going to do. So you need to be aware of the output. You need to be the custodian of the output. I think that is so powerful, the way you've summarized that, because just in the way it touches on everything in the world currently with disruption of AI.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. It was on the fly. It must have been a divine intervention that came to me. But I think if we just keep along this track and talking about it, the more that I think about education and the more that I think about this world with AI, and if we go back to the conversation of people being hesitant to use it, the undeniable facts are that AI is going to be with us forever from now on, and it's in our future, right? It's not going away. So how do we empower learners and educators to embrace AI and to use it in different ways? So if we start to think about things like assessment, if we tell learners you can't use AI in an assessment, we're probably barking up the wrong tree, because there's going to be some way that someone will be able to use AI. But how do we then use AI in that sense to create something that is a little bit more exciting? So use AI, but tell me what you think about the output. How has the output helped you to solve the question that you gave AI? And 4 different people do it and come together in a group, and you can all discuss how you all thought about the problem and how AI has helped you to solve it. So thinking about it in that way, I think is very useful, and that's where this conversation maybe shifts a little bit when we talk about being the custodian of the outputs. I think it's super important for educators especially to start thinking along these lines: is how do we use AI in the classroom to get the output that we want to create a better learning experience? Because the bottom layer is ultimately going to be some form of AI. I know there's still going to be human elements in the classroom. And just thinking about what we spoke about previously, also and going back to the human element of it, the teacher becomes the emotional support within a classroom, where students now are super isolated. They are on devices all day. They're at home watching TV. At school, they're working on AI. They're maybe not interacting with their peers as much. How do teachers become the facilitator for those kind of interactions, making sure that people still create friendships at school? I have friendships that have been going for the last 30 years from people that I met with at school. And how do we keep that going? So the role of the teacher shifts a little bit, also the teacher and the educator in that sense, in that the human aspect of education is going to become really important. I had this conversation with my partner after our last conversation, and she mentioned that, okay, that's great that now this teacher is the emotional support structure within a classroom. They are helping learners in different ways, but who's trained them how to do that? Teacher training hasn't done that in the past. Educator training, you don't really learn how to do that, especially in secondary education. Might be a little bit different for pre-primary and primary school, but who's teaching those skills? And those are things that we need to think about in this world. So it's also now, how do we equip educators with the skills to use AI as a base layer to be creative, and also how do we equip them with the skills to deal with this new world that they find themselves in, and having to shift how they interact in the classroom and their role in the classroom, because the teaching is, in my view, going to become less and less prevalent because it's going to be so readily accessible. It's redundant for me in a history class to have a educator read something from a textbook, or me read something from a textbook, when I can ask AI to recite it to me in 5 different ways from 5 different angles. So then what is the role of the teacher? Becomes getting creative with the answer of that. Great, how would you use this answer? What would you do in this situation if you were Winston Churchill in World War II? Let's write about that. How would you approach the Battle of Britain in 1940? And what do you do after you've learned about it? So it's a super interesting intersection where we're at in education in general.
That's a very, very exciting example you've used. What would you do if you were Winston Churchill? Because I want to tell you about a guest that I had. I don't know, I can't remember whether this was before or after our last conversation, where they worked out how to actually get evidence of the learning with AI. Did I tell you about that? Okay,
You
so
did, yeah.
I'm just going to touch on that then again. Is what these guys do is they essentially acknowledge the AI as a source of knowledge, but they evaluate the student side of the interpretation of that knowledge, the learning that comes from reading AI. So whether you read a book or whether you hear it from a teacher or whether you ask AI, you get the knowledge, but you still need to process that. And I myself went through the process of doing a little test for them on their platform on avocado oil, because I saw a video on YouTube about avocado oil. I thought, okay, I've never really thought about this. How do you get the oil from the avocado? And I went to Grok and I started asking questions and said, I've got this research task. I need to, do an assessment on avocado oil. Help me. And Grok started coming up with all the information. And I copied and pasted a lot of that into these people's platform. And then I started putting my own interpretations of that. And this platform clearly distinguishes between what is the AI content, what is my content, and when did AI just simply take my content and reworded it better. Just simply, that's it, just making it sound better than what I typed it, and correcting spelling mistakes and stuff like that. And at the end of this exercise, I understood a lot more about avocado oil than I did before, which is the purpose of education. So coming to Winston Churchill, if you think about it, if you have an assignment in history class to say, what would you do if you were Winston Churchill? That child has to go now and figure out, who is Winston Churchill? What did he do? Why is he so prominent in this question? What were the challenges that he faced? What is the Battle of Britain? Those are all the types of the knowledge that you can get from AI. It's nothing to it. But how do you now answer that question in a way that you can prove your learning? And I think that is the teacher then becomes the custodian of the output, because the teacher will evaluate that in a framework where it's clear what is the AI content and what is the learner content. I think that's it comes back to that phrase of yours. The teacher can become what they are literally normally would do with a red pen. They can now say, okay, let me evaluate whether this student, this learner, actually understands what he learned, by becoming the custodian of that AI output that every single student has. And then the teacher can employ an agent to help with the grading and the data analysis of all of that and so forth, because obviously the teacher still has the time problem that all teachers have. But I do think it's a way of getting the teachers involved in this learning process by just simply telling them that they have become the custodians of the output. You do realize I'm going to quote this in every single podcast after from here onwards. I'm going to quote that as
Yeah, no
a
worries. Just just TM trademark.
trademark. Pay your royalties. You know. But yeah, no. So let's move over to the learning side of it. You know, I think we've covered to a large extent now the educator side. You know, the challenges that teachers face with AI in education. A lot of them are worried about cheating, and as we've just discussed, there is a way around that to let the students use the AI and still evaluate and assess their own learning. Teachers should start thinking about their role in this whole place, as you've rightly said. But where does it leave the child that doesn't have the maturity to understand the difference between AI making it easy and inverted commas cheating, and AI becoming a learning tool? Come up with another one of your profound sayings for us there. You know, how would we explain this to children that AI is actually a valuable resource, but it can be exploitive and it can be exploited?
I think that number one, it's a far more difficult question to answer than the educator part of the education spectrum, because within a 12-year span, we deal with so many different needs for AI from a grade 1 to a grade 12. Every part of that learning journey is going to use AI in a different way. And I used the extreme example in our conversation last time, where again I was having a conversation with my partner about it. Will children need to write in 20 years? Will that need still be there? Because if everything is done with AI can teach you how to talk, can teach you, you need to prompt it, so you're using a computer or your fingers and a phone. And this changes so quickly. I've probably changed my tune about it over the last 3 months, and I don't think it will, because I'm becoming more human centered in all of these things. And I think because AI is so prevalent right now, everybody is AI, and forgetting that we human at the end of the day. So the I think that kind of theme rings true for learners, is remembering that we're still human behind this whole thing. We're still the people prompting AI. Although AI is going to help you to do certain things and to use certain things, if we go back to the educator example, it's still important to the human relationships that you have are going to be as important as using this AI to learn. So I think there's two things that I like to think about. The first one is, at every step of this journey, and your example that we were using now about the avocado oil is great. How, through the access to information, what is the output that we are getting that is useful? Because I can learn about how to make avocado oil, but it doesn't mean that I can explain how to make avocado oil after learning about it. I can go watch a YouTube video, but if someone asks me, I may not be able to say, this is how you do it. But if I have a task to do that, I'm solving a problem. I'm solving a problem in that I'm now able to assimilate this information to present it in a way that is understandable. And the phrase rings true that you only really understand something when you're able to teach it yourself. And I think that's an important concept to understand for learners. And that's where I think things are going. It's how do we use the readily available information for AI to solve problems and to get learners to teach these things that they are learning. So how do they become their own teacher through this, and how do they start to solve problems themselves? Because that's where it's going to go. Um, and it's really interesting. I don't think I've answered the question directly, but I think that's probably how I'd like to think about it right now, is how we empower learners to be their own teacher through this, because the role of the
Well,
teacher
I can
changes
add
a little bit.
to that a little bit, if you don't mind me picking your
Yeah,
brains
sure,
a
go
little
ahead.
bit more.
Yeah.
Because I just want to go back to the example of the avocado oil. As I was reading through it, they're talking about a drum spinning that separates the oil from the normal water and the pulp, and then also the peel, you know, of the avocado oil, because everything is just thrown if I remember correctly, it's just thrown into a drum and it spins very fast. And I started thinking, okay, but I'm forming a mental picture of this drum. And I thought, okay, so you've got all of this stuff inside this drum, and certain things get pushed to the outside because of centrifugal force, but somewhere along the line it's going to get clogged. How do you clean that outside of the drum, so that you can have a continuous motion of draining the oil? And I asked that question. I went back to Grok and I said, okay, so explain this to me. And just that ability to stop the learning process and ask a question. And this is where I'm picking your brains now, because you mentioned that your company is in HR. And I want to first ask you a question and then I'll come back to my point. I've heard a lot of people in HR recruitment specifically say that uh, mathematics is one of the key things that you look for when you appoint people. What is your experience of mathematics versus the mathematics literacy that the kids are taking?
Yeah, I think that now maths literacy becomes less relevant because it's a little bit removed from having to. If you think about maths and maths literacy, I didn't take maths literacy, it was a little bit before my time. I was still on standard grade and high grade, but I've been exposed to it. The difference that I see with the two is mathematics, you're solving a problem, you're able to take the knowledge that you have and solve an equation. Whereas maths literacy is a little bit different. You are doing things that you're kind of just following a process to get to an endpoint. You're not really solving a problem through that. So that's where I think the difference is. And if I think about it in any sense, whether it's HR or otherwise or recruiting, I think that's why that skill becomes valuable. And it's going to be the same thing with everything that we've spoken about. The ability to write, the ability to converse is going to be one that'll be super important. So how do you present yourself in an interview if you've only been speaking to AI for the last 3 years and you're very introverted and you're not able to work in a community with people and you're not able to, be empathetic and have high emotional quotient? All of those things become important, and I think they all follow the same theme. It's what is the human aspect that still is going to use AI to solve a problem for yourself. And that's where I see the difference with maths and maths literacy specifically. And that's why I would imagine it to be more valuable, is because you've had enough repetitions of solving a problem that you can use the backbone of the mathematical framework to solve another problem. Whereas maths literacy, in my view and my experience, I'm not qualified to talk on the relevance of maths literacy or maths, but that's how I see it. Is it's less about that and more about steps in a process to get to an endpoint. But I think all of those things will be more valuable in terms of the corporate world, and as people leave school and start to apply for jobs. Now it's so hard to distinguish AI written CVs from non-AI written CVs, and being able to write a CV that's not generated with AI is going to become valuable. It's not valuable yet, but it will be in the future. Recruiters don't want 3,000 CVs. They want 5 CVs that they can see what the person has done. They don't want 3,000 AI slop, what I call it. It's easy to get to that, write this and it all sounds the same. And I've got this problem with LinkedIn at the moment, and I find myself caught in this trap where, do I use AI to generate my LinkedIn content or not? And the answer lies somewhere in between. I'm ultimately the custodian of my voice and I want it to sound like me, but it's way easier to ask AI to create a post that does it in 5 seconds as opposed to me spending half an hour thinking and writing about it. But then I'm losing the part of me that I want to portray to the community that I want to speak to. So I know that's a little bit off of where we were going, but I think they all fit together. And that's, if you ask me about it, those kind of skills, whether it's maths or we talk about anything else, recruiters are going to look for those things and they're going to become more valuable. And educators are the ones who do that really well, are going to become very sought after. And it's the human aspect of it. If we go back to the learner, is something that I think we really need to double click on, and it's going to take a while for all of these things to change and the mindset to move. But I think that's where it's going to go in the next 10 to 15 years, where educators need to change their skill sets a little bit. And how are we then educating educators? How are we training the trainer to do all of those things? And it will shift, but these things take quite a long time. But that's where I see it going. That's how I imagine it kind of looking in the recruitment world, to answer your question.
Well, okay, so let me clarify a little bit more why I went that detour with the mathematics, because I'm of the opinion that mathematics as a subject, as a discipline, is necessary because of one thing only. And I mean, surely there will be other people who differ from me, but most people agree with me. If you look at yourself, you did maths up to matric level, you did geometry, you did calculus, you did trigonometry, you did various sorts of algebraic graphs. How much of that have you actually used after school? If you really think about it, have you ever used trigonometry again? Since you've finished grade 12. Why did they teach you trigonometry and geometry and analytical geometry and all of these fancy names if you never used it again? And my opinion on that question is, if you really think about it, which other subject in school is as good as forcing you to go and ask questions than mathematics? So you'll get confronted with trigonometry for the very first time in your life. You don't have any kind of reference framework for it, for sine, cos, and tan, and you need to master it. I mean, it's a problem. It's get thrown at you, and you need to master it because you're going to write a test about it in grade 10, 11, and 12, or standard 8, 9, and 10 in the old days. So you had to ask questions. You had to think about how to solve this problem, even though you're never going to use trigonometry as a discipline ever again in your life. And coming back to this idea of the research, knowledge input, the avocado oil, just that ability of thinking about what happens with the waste of that process. That's a question. That question facilitated more learning, more conversation, and I'm prompting your brains, picking your brains here on that concept of mathematics. I'm biased. Let me just put this for the record. I am biased because mathematics is my subject, and my over-the-shoulder tutor is a maths tutor, AI tutor. So I do have a skin in this game. But I would still like to hear from you what your opinion is on mathematics as an important subject for questions.
I agree with you and I disagree with you. I agree that maths is important. I don't agree that all of the mathematics discipline is important. So I think there's been and if we look at education in South Africa critically and we're honest with ourselves, it's needed a revamp for probably the past 30 years. We've been using the same old ways of teaching, and we've been teaching the same old things that don't necessarily set our learners up for success. And maths is probably, and science are probably the two subjects where they are empirical. They are what they are. There's a, if you had to destroy all of the books in the world about maths, they would all come back the same way, because maths is maths, and it has to be that. It's correct. It's right. If you threw away all the science books, they'd all come back in the same way, and we'd learn the same thing about Newtonian physics or whatever the case is, because that's what it is. These things are what they are. So I think that the skills of being thrown a problem and solving it, and the numbers part of maths is super, super useful. But for me, I've never used trigonometry in my life, and I was never a fan at school. I much preferred geometry and calculus, and I think they're far more useful. So to answer your question, yes, I think in certain ways, but I think there's also an opportunity for us to rethink some of these things. And how do we maybe not replace it, but me using sine, cos, and tan, it's not something that I would ever use again, but certainly equations and just geometry and thinking about the world in that way has been super useful throughout my whole life. So I do agree with you. I think the skills that you learn through it are not easily replicatable in any other subject. So I think that is very, very valuable. The problem solving, the getting something that you don't know how to do and then getting the answer is valuable. Whereas opposed to even accounting is what I'm talking about now is where you just learn something and you parrot it back on a piece of paper. You know, if I'm doing a business subject at university or marketing, just writing down 10 points of what was said in the textbook. It's not doesn't need me to think about it, and accounting somewhat, but it's still problem solving within that. And I think maths, the fact that you can get to a maths paper, you've learned everything that you've learned, and you still get something you've never seen before, and you need to solve that problem. That's a super valuable skill to have. But I don't think all of our education system is valuable in that sense, and I think maths is no different. So, like I say, I'll push back a little bit on some of it, but I do agree in the most part that if anything, if we lose all of our education and all of the subjects, the 2, 3 that you probably want to keep is a language and maths and science. Everything else you can let AI kind of do if we're really looking at a doomsday scenario about education. Those are foundational to a lot of things in human life, and I don't think they'll ever go away. And it teaches a valuable skill if you talk about learners needing to be entrepreneurial, that skill that you learn where you have a problem and you've never seen it before. How do I solve this as an entrepreneur when I wake up on a Friday and I have an issue and I need to fix and I've never seen this thing before? What do I do? You know, where's the mental reps that I've had to overcome a hard problem? And that comes with things like maths is a perfect example of that.
Okay, but let me rephrase the question maybe slightly. Also, again, picking your brains on this. We keep on talking about learning. You know, I was talking about the avocado oil project as a learning exercise, but when do you actually know that I've learned something? Have you ever thought of that? When can I say I have now learned something new? And when we go back to the age of AI that is coming, it's not necessarily facts that I'm referring to. It's a skill, that problem solving skill. When did I learn the skill? Do you have an opinion on that?
I do. I think we've touched on it a little bit, but when you are able to resynthesize information and put it into your own words, and you are able to become the teacher in inverted commas of this thing, that's when you have learned something. So if you use the example of the avocado oil, the fact that you were able to ask a critical question about the process shows that you learned something about it, because you've gone, okay, that's how it works, but what happens when this happens? That doesn't make sense, because if this gets clogged up, I'm not going to be able to get avocado oil. So I think the answer probably lies in 2 parts. It's one, when you can ask a critical question about something that you have seen or learned. And I know this doesn't answer the question about how do we assess learning or someone has learned, but that's how I would like to think about it, and where I would hope that education is going is someone has learned something when they're able to ask a critical question, number one, and they're able to explain it in their own words, or they're able to synthesize their own view of this thing. And maths is different because maths is absolute, but still they've learned something when they're able to get to an outcome. And whether the outcome is an answer of 7 from a maths equation, or whether the outcome is I'm now able to answer what I would do in Winston Churchill's shoes in 1940, those 2 things remain the same. So when I'm able to get to the outcome that I need, I've learned something. But what does that learning experience look like? It differs a little bit depending on what the topic or the subject is. But that's how I think about it, thinking critically about it, solving a problem, and ultimately putting something into your own words. And there's examples, like you say, of companies thinking about this already, which is super exciting to hear. Not sure if I answered the question, but that's how I think about it in broad
I
strokes.
think I'm going to throw a little bit into the mix, because I think from the answer that I'm looking for, and I mean, this is just my answer to this question, It needs to be weighed up against everything out there. But I do think there's overlap with what you've just said, in the sense that I would define learning, or when I have learned something, as I've mastered the subject content. And when I've mastered the subject content, I can actually teach on it. And that's what you said. You can actually explain it. So when we look at the topic, general topic of this podcast is AI actually a learning tool? You can now say to the AI, when you learn mathematics, you can say to it, I have a question. But once you feel that you've mastered it and you go to Winston Churchill, or you go to the avocado oil, you go to cloud formations, or you go to photosynthesis, or whatever it is that you have to learn in order to test and assess your mastery of that, you can now get AI to do that for you. It now becomes the interrogator, the investigator. It can now become a different role in your life, where it actually interrogates you in do you really understand the subject matter that you claim to have learned. And that, for me, is a big win for AI, because no teacher has the time and the resources to do that intensive evaluation of the learning, apart from just writing a standard test and marking that test. So I do think AI can have a big influence in evaluating mastery. We still need a standardized test. I mean, we really can't do away with that, I think, unless we have, I don't know, a lot of teachers or a lot of AI assistants for teachers that can do the individual assessments of every one of the 150 learners in a grade. But just as an interim move over into where the world is going to settle in a couple of years, I think just not kicking against AI is a good start. What do you think?
Absolutely. I love that idea that you were talking about when you were saying, now that you've given me the answer, let's test whether you actually understand this thing. So, do you know what you say you know? And using AI in that way to be an interrogator, poking holes in your scenario. So all of it that we've gone through. So you create an outcome of, how do I create avocado oil? Ask AI, or AI asks you, tells you why you're wrong, what you didn't think about, or you could have thought about it in a different way. Or in maths, how would you solve this problem another way? Because there's often more than one way to skin a cat. So using AI in education in that way, for sure. And I think the big takeaway there is not kicking against it, because it's a tsunami that's not stopping. It's how we figure out the best ways to use it, and what that could mean a range of different things. But that's really, really important, is using it in a way that is clever, and using it in a way that we're not fighting against the tide. And in education, it's a super interesting way to think about it. I've got a question for you. How would you think about AI in education, specifically in South Africa, across our education landscape? So we have schools that are extremely poor. We have schools that it costs 300,000 Rand a year to go there. How do you think about democratizing AI across all of those different landscapes, if we are to go this route of using AI in education? If you have thought about it, what are some ways that you think we could fix that problem?
I actually have, and the very very first podcast I had with April, don't know if you've watched that episode. She mentioned something that is quite profound, and it's still stuck with me. We're actually trying to get this launched up in northern KwaZulu Natal, which was my second interview with Zakele Kulu, the principal up there, where they sit with this exact same struggle. They've got students that, if it rains, they can't come to school because the roads are washed away. So let alone have devices and internet connectivity, and reliable electricity, and all of that becomes a real challenge. And that's why this conversation, all these podcasts are intended by design to be natural and organic, with all the pixelated images and the sound that goes away, in the middle of a conversation, and everything that goes with it, because these kids have got this tenfold sometimes. But what April said, and to answer your question, is and again, this comes back to my passion for entrepreneurship. We can find a person that becomes a champion in a community. And that one person may have a device. And that one person becomes a hub for the kids who don't have devices to use, say, for instance, an agent or just ChatGPT or something like that. Because that one person with his device, his tablet or his cell phone, can connect to the cell phone networks and actually have a session for internet connectivity. And then guiding the process from the teachers to those kids in terms of a pedagogy where we say to them, okay, you need to now study Winston Churchill, for argument's sake. And there's a prompt process that gets provided to those kids to do on this champion's phone or tablet or laptop or whatever the case is, but just gradually bringing them in. And what April said, which is so profound, is that good enough is sometimes good enough. It doesn't have to be a terabyte fiber line with excellent connectivity, and all of that. Just having somebody that exposes these kids in the middle of a rural area, or maybe get them to walk to a spot. I mean, this happened literally with Zakeli and myself. We had the conversation and we had to stop. He had to go and drive around and look for a better place to carry on the conversation because of the connectivity. So why not go just walk around, find a better place, take the phone and look for a signal that's just better than it was before. But that idea, and this is my answer to your question, good enough can be good enough sometimes to just get the kids in South Africa the benefit of what AI can do for them. Everything that you and I talked about now, this morning, about entrepreneurship, about asking questions, about developing a mindset of problem solving, of looking at the future from a different perspective, of maybe I should, just look at this from the perspective of what will change rather than what will stay the same. Uh, just the avocado oil example of asking questions in the process of learning, getting the AI to become the interrogator of your knowledge to evaluate whether you have mastered the subject content. All of that, AI becomes so brilliant because of its duplicative effect. It can do for 1,000 kids what one teacher can do for one child at the same time. I mean, and I don't know if that answers your question, but I do think the approach towards the technology backlog in South Africa, in Africa, needs to be addressed from a different, like Einstein said, I think it's Einstein that said, you cannot solve a problem from the same level of thinking you were at when you conceived it. We need to look at the problem from a different perspective and say, let's just start somewhere. Let's see what we can do, at least. It may not be optimal, but it's good enough. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. I think this is why it's so wonderful to live in South Africa, number one, and to think about these problems, because we just make a plan with a lot of different things. And this is a good example of just making a plan. It's not going to be perfect. I love the example of sometimes good enough is just good enough. And that's sparked a light bulb in my head. And that's not something that I thought about. It doesn't always have to be this perfect outcome of using AI in a certain way. Sometimes it is just deal with what you have. Sometimes what you have is what you have, and that's good enough. So that was a good answer to that question. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot. I'm glad I could be your guest for a few moments there. And switch the roles.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to take over there.
That's all right. It's all right. It's part of this whole organic process that I always love to push, for potential guests, because sometimes people are very nervous to come on board, and I just say, no, I can't even tell you where the conversation is going to go as long as it's not scripted. And this is a perfect example of that. So,
Yeah, cool.
but yeah, Stefan, I think we can conclude. I think unless you've got more to add, to the topic, I think we can conclude that
No?
in the spirit of this AI in education podcast, is AI able to be a learning tool? I think we've answered that question. That yes, it can actually be a learning tool. It just requires a different way of thinking about it. It's not just about prompting, it's about thinking what you prompt. It's about thinking what you design, thinking about what you want to achieve. And I want to conclude from my side, I want to conclude this conversation with a quote from a great man that says, we need to become the custodians of the outcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed that chat. I think I would just echo what you say and what we've spoken about. I think if anybody's listening and is a little bit wary about it, is just embrace it with what you have, embrace it with where you're at, embrace your learners with where they at, meet them where they at, meet yourself where you at. It's okay to not know right now, but after playing a little bit, you'll know a little bit more later today and tomorrow and next week and next month and next year. Just try it out. If you aren't sure where to start, ask AI. That's what we always say at work is you're not sure, ask it. Ask it what to do and see where it takes you. So yeah, really enjoyed the chat. Thanks for having me on and appreciate it.
The power of questions, eh? I mean,
Absolutely.
I constantly find myself back in the mathematical boat, with the power of questions. It always comes back to questions if you think about it. So sometimes I just hijack the moment, to get a little bit of momentum in for mathematics. But yeah, Stefan, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to do this again. Sorry about the first time when technical
No
issues became a problem. And this is again an example of, well, we just go with the flow, we make a plan, we rescheduled, and now we've had another great conversation. So thank you very much for that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, only a pleasure. If you want to chat about anything in future, I've loved these convos, so feel free to let me know. Happy to hop on again.
Yeah, perfect. And I mean, the same goes for you. If you think of something that you think you want to speak to me about, then just reach out and say, listen, Gerry, I want another episode with you. It is something that is going to be a standing invitation to you.
Awesome. Thank you.
You can just pop me a message and say, I've got this idea, or I thought about this, or whatever. And then we have another conversation like this.
Sounds good. Awesome.
All right. Perfect. Thanks, Stefan.
Cool.
Appreciate it. Enjoy
Thanks,
the
Gerry.
weekend.
That's you.
Cheers.
You
Bye.
too. Cheers, bye.